indicating some of the things that we're only now discovering for ourselves. The shape of the earth is something that puzzled people for a long time. Surah 39, verse number 5 seems to be ahead of its time when it describes when it speaks about the alternation of the day and night. It says, God coils the day upon the night and the night upon the day. And you can see the coiling is obviously like that. If we speak of a man coiling the turban around his head, we will use the same terminology, yukawwir, and you see the shape of the head. So if the night and the day are coiling around the earth, that's due obviously to the rotation of the earth with relation to the sun. And that gives us some idea already of the shape of the earth, because the term yukawwir is from kura, which means a ball, and that's an indication that the earth has this particular shape. If we continue, Surah 24, verse number 43, talks about the formation of clouds. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يُزْجِي سَحَابًا ثُمَّ يُؤَلِّفُ بَيْنَهُ ثُمَّ يَجْعَلُهُ رُكَامًا. Don't you see that God causes the clouds to disperse, and then he gathers them together and stacks them up as mountains? Now that's an interesting type of description, that the clouds should be seen as doing this. And yet, in fact, a modern scientist would describe the converging zones of clouds, would speak of the converging zone of cumulus clouds, how the small pieces come together, and then actually they do stack up as mountains. Mountains is in fact a mountain range is a good description of how cloud formation looks like. So the cloud grows, it stacks up from the isolated pieces, and then eventually from the midst of that stack, the rain comes out, just like the Quran describes. So again, the Quran is not a book of science. There's no reason to explain all of this in the Quran. And yet the Quran, in drawing people's attention to what God does, it goes beyond what people might understand at the time, and tells us things that we are now discovering to be so true. So then we have to ask, who is the author of the Quran to tell us all of this? Surah 24, verse number 40, talks about the example of the one who denies God. It is as if like he's in the depths of the ocean, covered by wave upon wave, and if in fact he holds out his hand, he won't be able to he will hardly be able to see his hand because of the darkness of where he is. And it is interesting that today we know through deep sea diving that in fact at certain depths the light does not reach at all, for example below 1,000 meters. And what about the other part of that expression, that this person is like he's covered by wave upon wave? Mawjun min fawqihi mawj. So there's a wave, and then over it a wave. All we see is the surface wave of the ocean. And yet scientists today can tell us that there is actually an undercurrent, a wave below the upper surface wave that we observe. So this sort of information, I believe, is a very strong indication that the Quran is the Word of God. Let me continue then. I'd like to look at one area of science which is, to me, more fascinating than the others, and much more precise in the indications. Embryology. Embryology could not be studied prior to the discovery of the microscope, because we're dealing here with microscopic things that cannot be visible or studied by the naked eye. And the microscope was invented 1,000 years after the Quran already had been a revealed book. So if we can see that the Quran speaks about this sort of phenomenon, the growth and development of the human embryo, and describes it accurately, then we have here a further indication that this is not simply the word of a human being. The Quran speaks of God creating us out of a nutfa. A nutfa in Arabic is a tiny drop. And as Dr. Bouquet puts it, if you have a bucket of water, you throw everything out, then there is going to remain in the bucket some small amount. And that is described as nutfa in Arabic. And today we know that it is only out of the selection out of the whole, and in fact on some occasions the Quran says so as well. It is a sulalatim min ma'in mahin. It is a selection out of a despised fluid out of which you eventually are created. So only some of the sperms reach the ovum, and of course only one will be successful in penetrating the ovum. It's as if many are courting a female and only one eventually becomes successful in getting the girl. But the sperms do something similar. What is interesting as well is that the Quran seems to indicate that it is from the male contribution that the sex of the baby is determined. And how that is so in modern science, it might be explained like this. The female chromosomes are always XX, a double X. And so when they split, they split into an X and an X, two X chromosomes. The male chromosomes, on the other hand, are X and Y. So when they split, you get one X and one Y. So then, when there is the fertilization between male and female, you can have an X from the male and an X from the female, in which case you get the double X, and therefore we're back to a girl. That's what the female chromosomes are, the double X. But then if you get a Y from the male and an X from the female, then you get the XY, in which case you have a boy. So what makes the difference between, oops, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. What makes the difference between the, see, I just did it again. Some people never learn, right? Okay, obviously I can't do that without my highlighter. Yeah. So what makes the difference between an XY and an XX is what comes from the male. And the Quran in Surah 53 says, وَأَنَّهُ خَلَقَ الزَّوْجَيْنِ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى مِن نُطْفَةٍ إِذَا تُمْنَى. And He is the one who created you in male and female from a tiny drop when it is poured forth. And that which is poured forth is obviously the male contribution. So that's very interesting. Dr. Keith Moore of the University of Toronto used this passage of the Quran to tie in with the modern discovery of genetics. That it shows that, and he shows that the Quran's indication there it corresponds with the modern idea that the baby, the sex of the child is determined by the male contribution. That the embryo is developed in stages, in fact, is a very modern idea. And yet this is mentioned in the Quran. The Quran says that God created you not only in one stage after another, but describes the stages in precise detail. For example, at one stage the Quran says that God created you as an alaka. An alaka in Arabic is a thing that clings. I'll use this thing, yeah. Alaka is a thing that clings. In fact, alaka can have a variety of meanings. It can mean a thing that clings, it can mean a clot of blood, it can mean a leech in the Arabic language, it can mean a thing that hangs, from alaka ya'ala, a thing that it hangs. And indeed, the blastocyst can be seen at an early stage, something around 15 days old in this case, clinging onto the uterus, hanging onto the uterus, and it, just like a leech sucks blood, the human embryo actually sucks the blood of the mother, literally, because it has chorionic villi that penetrates and grips into the uterus. And then it draws the nourishment from the mother's blood. So the human embryo at this stage actually also looks like an embryo. It looks like a leech in terms of outward appearance. We can see this more graphically in this picture, where the outward shape of the human embryo is quite similar to a leech. And this is at 24 days old. Then the Quran says that it goes from one stage to another. You're a nutfa, a tiny drop, and then God made you into an alaqa, and then God made you into a mudgha. And then mudgha in Arabic I'm a little ahead of myself. Let me just, this is a picture of the embryo hanging, so that illustrates another meaning of the term. But let's continue this. So mudgha, a chewed lump. Dr. Moore was fascinated by this description, and he took a plasticine model of the embryo and bit into it to leave teeth marks impressed upon it, and he showed that to be similar to the somites forming on the developing embryo at this stage, at 28 days old. And